Chinaza dropped the heavy basin from her hands and sank to her knees in the middle of the compound. The ripe tomatoes she had spent her last money buying scattered across the red earth as tears streamed down her face. Her youngest child was tied securely to her back, crying from hunger. 2 other children stood beside her in faded school uniforms, clutching their school bags and staring at her with worried eyes. "Mummy, are we still going to school today?" Chinaza tried to answer, but the lump in her throat refused to let the words out. It was barely 7 in the morning. She had already walked to the borehole before dawn, cooked breakfast over a smoking firewood stove, washed clothes, swept the compound, and prepared goods for the small market stall that fed the entire family. Yet her phone would not stop ringing. Her younger brother needed money. Her elderly mother needed medicine. The landlord wanted his rent. The school wanted fees. A cousin needed help. And somehow, every problem in the family always found its way to Chinaza's doorstep. Everyone knew how to bring their burdens to her. Nobody ever stopped to ask who was carrying hers. As neighbours watched from their verandas beneath the mango tree, Chinaza slowly wiped her tears and struggled back to her feet. But deep inside, something was changing. Because after years of carrying everyone else's weight in silence, she was finally reaching the point where her strength could no longer hide her pain. And before that day was over, something would happen that would force an entire family to face a truth they had spent years avoiding. A truth about sacrifice, a truth about gratitude, and a truth about the woman they had all mistaken for someone who would never break. This is the story of Chinaza, the woman who carried everyone until that day came. Nobody in the family could remember exactly when Chinaza became the one they all leaned on. It had happened the way most things in life happen slowly, then all at once. When their father died 17 years ago, Chinaza had been 22, newly married and barely steady on her own feet. Yet somehow she was the one who organised the burial, the one who sat with their mother through the nights of weeping, the one who quietly began sending money home each month while building her own household from nothing. At first, it was small things: a little money for Kelechi's school fees, medicine for Mama Ugochi's swollen joints, a few naira for her sister-in-law's transport fare. Nobody named what was happening. Nobody called it dependence or obligation. It was simply understood the way things were understood, without being spoken, that Chinaza would provide. And Chinaza, who had inherited her father's big aching heart, did not know how to say no. She had met Amaka at a friend's wedding in Enugu. He was tall, soft-spoken, with a laugh that came from deep in his belly. In those early years, they had been partners in the truest sense, sharing small meals, making plans by candlelight, dreaming together about what their lives would become. Amaka had worked at a printing company in town, and Chinaza had started a small tomato and pepper stall in the Eke market. Together they were not rich, but together they were enough. Then the children came. Adaeze first, then Chizom, and finally, after a long and difficult wait, baby Somto. And with each child, the needs grew larger. With each passing year, Amaka's contributions grew smaller, not from cruelty, but from the creeping comfort of a man who had watched his wife manage so many things so well that he began to believe managing was simply her nature. He did not stop caring for Chinaza. He cared for her the way a man cares for a river, taking from it freely, confident that it will always keep flowing. Mama Nkechi, who lived 2 compounds away and had known Chinaza since they were both young brides in the neighbourhood, was the first person to notice the change. It was a Tuesday morning when she saw Chinaza sitting alone at the edge of her stall in the market, staring at a small notebook with an expression that was not exhaustion and was not sadness, but was something worse than both. It was the look of a person doing arithmetic they already know the answer to, hoping somehow the numbers will come out differently this time. "Chinaza," Mama Nkechi said quietly, settling herself on the bench beside her. "How are you?" Chinaza looked up and smiled, the way she always smiled, wide and warm and immediate, as if she kept the smile ready near the surface for exactly this purpose. "I am well, Mama Nkechi. Business is a little slow today, that is all." Mama Nkechi looked at the notebook. She looked at the dark half-moons beneath Chinaza's eyes. She looked at the way Chinaza's fingers trembled just slightly as she folded the notebook shut. "Is Amaka helping more these days?" The smile flickered. "Amaka is trying." That was the answer of a woman who had long ago stopped expecting the thing she needed and had made peace with what she was getting instead. Mama Nkechi said nothing more that morning, but she filed the moment away carefully, the way wise women file things they hope will never become necessary. Adais had her mother's sharp eyes and her father's stubbornness, and at 16 she was certain she understood the world well enough to be impatient with it. She was brilliant, her teachers said so, without hesitation, and she burned with the particular hunger of a girl who has been told she is exceptional and who believes, with her whole young heart, that exceptional people leave. She wanted to go to medical school. She wanted to become a doctor. Not because someone had encouraged her toward it, but because she had watched suffering close enough, in this house and in this neighbourhood, to know that healing people was a thing worth doing. But she also believed, in the way that teenagers believe things without meaning to be unkind, that her mother did not fully understand her. When Chinaza told her to come home before dark, Adais heard, "I do not trust you." When Chinaza checked her notebooks, Adais heard, "I do not believe in you." When Chinaza seemed distracted or short-tempered during conversations about the future, Adais heard, "I do not care about your dreams." She did not know about the scholarship examination registration form that Chinaza had paid for quietly. Pulling money from the small tin she kept tucked behind the bags of dried pepper at her stall money she had set aside over 6 months by skipping lunch every market day. She did not know that Chinaza had walked to 3 different bookshops to find the cheapest copies of the study materials Adais needed, or that she had stayed up past midnight one night, reading the chapter headings by phone light, trying to understand enough of what her daughter was studying to ask the right questions. She did not know any of this because Chinaza did not tell her. Chinaza did not tell her because she did not want gratitude. She wanted Adeze to study with a free mind, unburdened by the knowledge of what things cost. What she did not understand was that her silence, meant to be a gift, was being received as indifference. Kelechi called on a Thursday afternoon. Chinaza was in the middle of arranging her stall, her hands orange from handling peppers, when the phone vibrated against her hip. She saw his name on the screen and felt the familiar mixture of love and dread that had become her default response to her brother. "Chinaza, how now, Kelechi? I am at work." I know. Quick thing, you remember that business I was telling you about, the generator spare parts distribution?" She remembered. She had heard about it 3 months ago. She had also heard about the motorcycle taxi business before that, and the fish farming venture before that, and the frozen food distribution before that. "What about it?" "I have a supplier. Good deal. I just need a small capital to start. 80,000 naira, just to get things moving. I will pay you back before the end of next month, I swear on Daddy's grave." Chinaza closed her eyes. She pressed her free hand against her forehead. 80,000 naira was what she had managed to save over 3 months by eating once a day at the market, by refusing to repair the leak in the kitchen roof, by sending the children to school with smaller portions than she wished she could give them. "Kelechi," she said carefully, "you still have not repaid the 50,000 from March." Silence. "And the 30,000 from October." More silence. "I don't have 80,000, she said. It was the truth, and also not quite the truth. She had it. But it was not money she could give away and still pay the rent, which was already 3 weeks overdue. "Chinaza, you are my blood. Who else do I have?" And that was the sentence that undid her every time, not because it was manipulation, though it was, but because it was also real. He was her blood. He was the small boy she had walked to school, whose tears she had wiped, whose hand she had held through the dark years after their father died. She loved him, and love, in their family, had always expressed itself through sacrifice. "Let me see what I can do," she said. She gave him 40,000. She told herself it was a loan. She knew somewhere beneath the telling that it was not. Amaka was not a bad man. This was the thing that made it so difficult, because bad men were at least clear. You knew where you stood with a bad man. You could name the enemy and fight it or leave it. But Amaka was a good man who had gradually, imperceptibly, become the kind of man who mistook his wife's competence for independence. He saw her waking before dawn and assumed she preferred it. He saw her managing the bills and assumed she had it under control. He saw her smiling through every difficulty and assumed she was fine. He did not ask questions because she never asked for help, and he had confused those two things. There were moments when he glimpsed the truth, when she came home with shadows so deep beneath her eyes that they looked painted on, when she winced, sitting down in a way that suggested something in her body was protesting, when she ate half a plate of food and called it enough. In those moments, he felt a vague unease, a nudge of concern that he almost followed but didn't, because following it would require asking questions, and asking questions might produce answers he wasn't ready to hold. So he watched football in the evenings, he laughed with the neighbours, he slept the uncomplicated sleep of a man who believed his household was running smoothly because the woman inside it had not yet shown him otherwise. Mama Nkechi tried to show him. She came one evening when Chinaza had taken Somto to the clinic, and she sat with Amaka under the mango tree and said, plainly and without ceremony, "Your wife is drowning, Amaka. She is drowning, and everybody is throwing her more weight and calling it family love." Amaka had shifted in his chair. He had said, "Chinaza is strong. You know how she is. I know how she is being made to be. Mama Nkechi said. There is a difference, but the difference was too fine for Amaka to hold that evening, and by morning it had slipped away. October arrived with 3 crises, walking side by side like old friends. Mama Ugochi was hospitalized. The clinic in the village was not equipped for her condition, and the referral to the bigger hospital in the city came with a bill that made Chinaza's stomach drop when she saw it. 75,000 naira for the first assessment alone. The landlord arrived at the compound door the same week, polite but immovable. The rent, 3 months of it, was due in full, or the family would need to make arrangements to leave. And Chisom's school sent home a letter informing parents that outstanding fees for the second term, if not settled within 7 days, would result in students being turned away from class. Chinaza sat at her kitchen table on a Wednesday night when the children were asleep and spread out her finances the way a general spreads out a map of a losing battle. She had 62,000 naira in the tin behind the peppers. The hospital needed 75,000. The landlord needed 90,000. The school needed 22,000. Total needed 187,000 naira. Total available 62,000. The headache that had been visiting her for weeks settled in behind her eyes with an intensity that made her vision blur. She pressed the heels of her palms against her temples and sat very still, breathing slowly, trying to make the numbers change through sheer force of will. They did not change. She had sold a section of her market inventory that week. The surplus pepper, the good tomatoes she had been saving for the weekend rush to add another 15,000 to the tin. She had considered and rejected the idea of borrowing from her market cooperative because she already owed them money she had not repaid. She had considered calling Kelechi and asking for the money back, and then let the thought die quietly, because she already knew the answer. She had been skipping dinner for 2 weeks. She told herself it was fine that she was not very hungry, that the food was better used for the children, but her body had begun keeping its own accounts. The dizziness that came in waves, the way her hands sometimes shook in the mornings, the headaches that were no longer occasional but constant, a low throb that lived behind her eyes and announced itself more loudly whenever she stood up too quickly. She put her head down on the kitchen table, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, she wept, not the quiet, contained tears of a woman adjusting her expectations, but the deep, helpless weeping of someone who has finally run out of adjustments to make. She wept for 20 minutes. Then she wiped her face, put on the kettle, made a cup of tea, and began making a list of who she could call to borrow money from, because that was what she did. That was what she had always done. She carried on. The following Thursday was a day of many things happening at once. Chinaza had arranged to visit her mother at the hospital in the morning, swing by the market to restock, pick up Somto from the neighbour's house, and be at Chisom's school to sort out the fees before 3 o'clock. She had done the borrowing she needed to do a painful, humiliating series of phone calls she had made in the bathroom with the tap running so Amaka wouldn't hear, and she had the school fees in an envelope in her bag. She did not have the hospital money, not yet, but she had enough to demonstrate good faith to the ward nurse, enough to keep her mother's care continuing for another few days while she figured out the rest. It was hot. Enugu in October was a different kind of heat from January, a thick, pressing heat that felt like it had weight, like it wanted something from you. Chinaza moved through it wearing the same wrapper she had washed and worn for 3 days, because she had not had time to let anything else dry. She reached the market at 11, loaded what she needed onto the handcart, paid, pushed the cart back to her stall, unloaded it, arranged the goods, checked her phone, saw 2 missed calls from Kelechi, put the phone in her pocket without calling back, and began the walk back to the compound. She was crossing the compound, the same red earth where her tomatoes had scattered that morning weeks ago, when the heat seemed to thicken around her all at once, and the ground tilted. She reached out for something to hold and found nothing. She fell, not dramatically, not the way people fall in films, with a cry and a crash. She simply folded, slowly, like a paper person being gently crumpled, and went down onto the earth she had swept that same morning. The compound was quiet for one long, terrible second. Then Mama Nkechi screamed. Amaka arrived at the compound from work to find his wife being loaded into a neighbour's car, unconscious, with Mama Nkechi holding her hand and Adaise standing in the middle of the compound with Somto on her hip, crying in a way Amaka had never seen his daughter cry before, not like a child, but like a woman, from somewhere deep and frightened. "What happened?" he kept asking. "What happened?" Nobody had a full answer, because nobody had been paying enough attention to know. He rode to the hospital with her. He sat in the corridor while the doctors worked. He prayed, clumsily, and with the desperate earnestness of a man who has suddenly understood that he has been taking something for granted in a way you only understand once you are standing at the edge of losing it. When the doctor came out, he said the words Amaka was not prepared for. Severe dehydration, malnutrition, hypertension that had gone undiagnosed and untreated, likely for over a year, exhaustion so profound it had expressed itself as a collapse. "Her body has been sending signals for some time," the doctor said carefully. "Has she seemed unwell to you recently?" Amaka opened his mouth and closed it again. Had she seemed unwell? He thought about the dinners she barely touched, the way she was always the last one to bed and the first one awake. The headaches she mentioned once or twice and then stopped mentioning, not because they stopped, he now understood, but because she had learned that mentioning them only added worry to her list. "Yes," he said quietly, "I think she has." He went home that evening to collect some things for her. And it was while moving through the house quietly, with a grief that felt like new eyes, that he began to find things. The small notebook in the kitchen drawer, filled with columns of figures, income, expenses, debts owed to her. Numbers that told a story of a woman who had been managing an impossible equation for years, robbing one obligation to pay another, borrowing to repay what she had borrowed before. An envelope behind the rice sack containing receipts, hospital receipts for Mama Ugochi, school fee receipts, pharmacy receipts, a letter from the landlord dated 2 months ago threatening eviction. A second notebook, smaller, that he found under the mattress. This one was different. This one was not numbers. In it, Chinaza had written small things, observations, frustrations, gratitudes, griefs in the careful handwriting of a woman who had nowhere else to put the things she was feeling. Kelechi called again today. "I gave him money I could not afford to give. I do not know how to stop. He is my brother, and I love him, but I am so tired. Adais looked at me today like she is angry at me, and I do not know what I have done. I wish I could explain to her, but there is no time, and I do not want her to worry. Emeka slept through the baby's crying last night. I did not wake him. He works hard. But I also work hard, and I do not know if he knows that. My head has been aching for 3 weeks. I will go to the chemist when I have extra money. I will go next week. Amaka sat on the edge of the bed with the notebook in his hands for a long time. He thought about all the mornings he had woken up to breakfast already made, to a compound already swept, to children already dressed and ready for school. He had received all of it as simply the texture of his life. The way you receive air, without noticing it, without counting it, certainly without thanking anyone for it. He had not seen the labour. He had not seen the cost. He had looked at his wife and seen a strong woman doing what strong women do, and he had not thought to ask whether strength was a choice she was making or a role she had been left with no option but to fill. He put the notebook down and wept, not the way Chinaza wept, alone in the kitchen at midnight, but loudly, with the full weight of a man reckoning with himself. When word spread, and in their neighbourhood, word always spread, the family gathered. Kelechi arrived at the hospital with red eyes, wearing the expression of a man who has received a phone call that has forced him to look at himself. He sat in the corridor beside Amaka without speaking for a long time. Eventually he said, "I did not know it was this bad." Amaka looked at him. "Neither did I." She never said, because we never asked. Kelechi was quiet for a long time after that. The numbers were running through his head. He was doing the same arithmetic Amaka had done, adding up what he had taken and what he had given back, and arriving at a sum that left him ashamed. Adaize sat at her mother's bedside for hours the first day, holding her hand, talking to her in a low, steady voice. When Chinaza finally opened her eyes and looked at her, Adaize could not speak for a moment. She was too busy relearning the face of the woman in front of her. "Mommy," she managed finally. "Ada," Chinaza said, and her voice was rough, but her eyes were clear. "I didn't know," Adaize said. "About the registration fees, about the study materials. I didn't know you. I didn't want you to know. I wanted you to be free to study, but you weren't free. You were struggling, and I was—" Adaize stopped. She thought about all the times she had read coldness into her mother's silences, distance into her mother's distraction, all the times she had felt unseen, all the times the truth was the exact opposite of what she had understood. "I thought you didn't care about my dreams," Adaize said finally, and it cost her something to say it. Chinaza squeezed her daughter's hand. "Everything I have done for the past 16 years, she said quietly, has been because of your dreams, all of yours." Chinaza spent 11 days in the hospital. In those 11 days, her family, without her to manage it, discovered something profound. The compound did not run by itself. Meals did not appear. Clothes did not wash themselves. Somto did not bathe or eat or sleep on his own schedule. The school needed forms filled. The market stall needed someone to open it. The landlord needed an answer. Amaka had never cooked for 4 people before. He burned the first pot of rice. He called Mama Nkechi in a panic at 7 in the morning the second day, and she came and stood beside him in the kitchen and walked him through it without teasing him, because she understood that this was a man being broken open and remade, and that process deserved respect. Adaize took on her mother's role in the evenings, washing uniforms, making sure Chisom's homework was done, settling Somto to sleep with the firmness and gentleness she had absorbed from watching Chinaza all her life, without knowing she was absorbing it. Kelechi came every day, not to ask for anything, but simply to help. He opened the stall. He carried the goods. He arranged the produce the way he had watched Chinaza arrange it 100 times without noticing he was learning. He did not do it well at first. He did it better by the end of the week. "She makes it look easy," he said to Amaka one evening. "Yes," Amaka said. "She does." There was a long pause. "That is the problem," Amaka said. Chinaza came home on a Friday morning. The compound had been swept. The kitchen was clean in a way it had never quite been. When only Amaka was responsible for it, he had clearly swept it several times, trying to get it right. There were tomatoes on the counter, fresh ones. The children were dressed and waiting. Somto launched himself at her legs the moment she came through the gate and held on with both fists, as if he had been afraid she might dematerialize. Amaka stood a little behind the children, with an expression she had not seen on his face in years open, unguarded, slightly afraid. He had written her a letter while she was in the hospital. 3 pages. In his careful, slanted handwriting, he had given it to Adaize to bring to her on the 5th day. She had read it twice. She had cried both times. The letter did not make grand promises. It did not ask for forgiveness dramatically or make sweeping declarations. It was simply a man writing down, carefully and honestly, everything he now understood that he had not understood before. What she had been doing, what it had cost, what he was going to do differently. She had believed it, not because of the words, but because of the swept compound. In the months that followed, things changed not all at once, not perfectly, but in the way real change happens, incrementally, with setbacks, with effort, with a slow accumulation of different choices made day after day. Amaka took on the school runs. He began contributing half the household expenses in actual money, not in vague intention. He sold the television set he had been paying installments on to cover part of Mama Ugochi's hospital bill. He found additional work repairing generators for neighbours in the evenings, and he gave Chinaza his earnings without being asked. Kelechi's transformation was slower and more honest. He sat with Chinaza one afternoon, 6 weeks after she came home, and put a folded envelope on the table between them. Inside was 20,000 naira. "It is not everything I owe you," he said. "I know that, but it is something. It is the beginning of something." Chinaza looked at the envelope for a long time. Then she looked at her brother, really looked at him, past the bravado and the charm and the long history of asking and taking, and saw something she had not expected, shame being metabolized into responsibility. A small and fragile change, but a real one. She put her hand over his. "It is enough to begin with," she said. 3 months after Chinaza came home from the hospital, Adaize sat the scholarship examination. The morning before, Chinaza braided her daughter's hair at the kitchen table while the sun came through the window, and they talked, really talked, in the unhurried way they had never quite managed before, about medicine and sacrifice and what it means to love someone. Adaize told her mother about all the times she had mistaken her silence for indifference. Chinaza told her daughter about all the times she had confused secrecy with protection. "I should have told you more," Chinaza said. "I should have asked more," Adaiz replied. The scholarship letter arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. Adaize had been accepted. Full funding, a place in the medical sciences program she had been dreaming about since she was 12 years old. She ran into the compound screaming and found her mother at the stall, arranging tomatoes with the particular focus she brought to things she loved. And Chinaza looked up and saw her daughter's face and knew before Adaiz said a word. She opened her arms and Adaiz came into them, and they held each other in the middle of the compound on the same red earth where, one long year ago, Chinaza had fallen to her knees and wept while the tomatoes rolled away from her into the dust. The earth was the same. Everything else had changed. Later that evening, when the children were inside and the compound was quiet, Chinaza sat under the mango tree with Mama Nkechi, and they drank tea and watched the darkness come the way it comes in Enugu slowly, softly, then all at once. "You almost didn't make it," Mama Nkechi said, not unkindly. "I know," Chinaza said. "You would have kept going until you couldn't." "I know that too." Mama Nkechi looked at her carefully. "What made you think you had to carry it all alone?" Chinaza was quiet for a long time. She watched a lizard cross the compound wall, pausing at the top to bob its head against the sky. "Nobody asked me to carry it," she said finally. "That is the thing I kept thinking about while I was lying in that hospital bed. Nobody held a gun to my head. I chose it, every time. I chose to give Kelechi the money. I chose not to tell Amaka how bad it was getting. I chose to skip meals so the children could eat more." She paused. "I thought that was love. I thought that was what it looked like. And now," Chinaza wrapped her hands around the warm cup of tea, "now I think love is supposed to go both ways. I think you can love people with everything you have and still be allowed to need something back. I think the people who love you should want to know when you are struggling, not because you told them in the right words, but because they were paying attention." She looked at her hands. The hands that had carried basins and swept compounds and counted money in the dark and written down numbers that never added up the way she needed them to. "I was so busy being strong," she said quietly, "that I forgot I was also allowed to be human." Mama Nkechi reached over and squeezed her hand. "You are still learning," she said. "We all are," Chinaza agreed. Above them, the mango tree moved in the small evening wind. In the house, Emeka's voice carried out through the open window he was reading to Somto, poorly and with great enthusiasm, making the child laugh. Adaize was on the phone, she could tell, talking with the animated delight of a girl whose future had just confirmed itself. Chisom was somewhere being 12, quietly, persistently, in the way Chisom did everything. Her family, her whole, imperfect, still learning family. Chinaza leaned back under the mango tree and let herself rest, not because she had finished carrying anything, but because she had finally understood that carrying things alone was not the same as holding a family together, and that the strongest thing she had ever done was not the years of silent sacrifice, but the single moment of collapse that had finally, at great cost, made everyone else see she was still Chinaza, but she was no longer carrying it alone. The strongest person in the family is often the one suffering in silence. Love should be shared through responsibility, not taken for granted through sacrifice. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification, because we bring to you real life stories that will inspire you. God bless you and see you in the next video. Please don't forget to subscribe. Thank you.